Welcome back to Around the Table with Stacy Smith as we take a look at the economy and investing. It happens 4 times a year. It's called the earnings season. Corporations are now reporting how well they did from July through September, which is the third quarter. So, Kim, taking on what you just talked about in earnings and how well companies are doing, are the companies in the third quarter still making money?
They are making money, and they're making a little bit more than investors thought at the beginning of this earnings season. So that's good. That's always good. But more importantly, if you roll back the clock to last year at this time, the market had been going down for maybe 4 or 5 months, and it would continue to go down for the rest of the year. So analysts, like my old job, used to have to be forced to mark down what they thought the companies were going to earn, not just in the current quarter, but looking forward. So we went into 2023 with a pretty low expectation of most companies out there. And throughout this year, analysts have had to adjust those earnings upward. Now, third quarter is a pivotal time for reporting. Well, not really the reporting of third quarter. It's the look ahead into not only the last quarter of the year, the fourth quarter, which we're in, but what's going to happen next year? What do companies see in their pipeline? And sadly, today is day 2 of earnings season. We don't really have enough data. And these are banks. And banks are they can't really see all that far into the future. If people are going to borrow, they're going to just roll up in a relatively short term and say, hey, can I borrow some money? They're not like an industrial company that are building things that take 6 months or longer to make. So we're not getting good idea right now about what the landscape looks like for the fourth quarter and into next year. But so far, companies are making money, and that always makes me happy.
Are you happy, Carrie?
Yes, actually, it's funny you asked the question earlier about the market figuring out what it wants to do with all this. And, the market's been up for the year. So we always have to remember, and to Kim's point, it's always about what's going to happen 6-9 months from now. So when we look at the market last year, the market was clearly anticipating interest rates going up and what impact that might have. And this year has actually turned out so far, knock on wood, we're not done, but to be a pretty decent year for stocks. Bonds are a different story. But as we head into next year, this earnings season is really going to be about setting the tone for next year.
It's funny, though, when Carrie's right, when you look at the stock market, it's been a very good year at the index level. So the S&P 500 is up, give or take 13% or so, 14% for the year. But I bet most people or most investors don't know that more than half of the stocks in the US are negative on the year. 52%. I looked at it last week. So it's pretty top heavy with those, top 20, 10, 20 stocks really driving the overall market performance. But to Kim's point and Carrie's point, the earnings thus far and the banks have been signaling pretty strong growth over the past 3 months. But as you're looking at the earnings calls rolling out over the next couple of weeks, it is vital that you look at what their projections are as they head into end of 2023 and into 2024.
Well, does that, if 52% of the stocks are on negative for the year,
yep,
does that mean that most people's portfolios are not reflecting the kind of increase that we've seen in the S&P 500, the Dow, and the NASDAQ?
I mean, not necessarily. I mean, that's the beauty of a market cap weighted index. That's really the beauty of the S&P 500. The biggest, the stocks that continue to outperform get bigger and bigger in that index. And if momentum continues to drive that, they're going to have a disproportionate effect on the overall performance of the market. What it really means, though, is, you've heard maybe the Magnificent Seven that are the stocks that have driven the market so far year to date. They have really carried the S&P 500 up and up, and they're the biggest weighting stocks in the S&P 500. So if you're broadly diversified, you probably have a good chance of having a decent amount of allocation to those stocks. But if you are somebody who has the equal weighted S&P 500, or you're picking individual stocks to invest in, and you don't have a large weighting to those companies, doesn't mean you did poorly. It might mean that you've underperformed a passive broad index like the S&P 500 so far in 2023.
Does that beg the choice then of doing an ETF to make sure you're kind of level with this sort of ups and downs in the market?
I would make the argument in
Different stocks.
2023 that could be the case. But again, I really believe that as the economy becomes more and more uncertain, these Fed rate hikes that have started about 18 months ago, really, as Kerry mentioned, the impacts of these rate hikes are going to work its way through the economy. You're going to want to be a little bit more nimble than just blindly investing in an S&P 500 or an ETF. I think it's great for a core holding in the portfolio, but you can also augment that by holding different types of factors, different types of ETFs, different types of stocks to really adjust your overall portfolio based on where we are in the economic cycle.
Okay, Frank, your microphone is off and we are almost out of time here. I'll give you about 15 seconds. There you go.
To go back to your music analogy, times they are a changing. And that being said, there to add to what Michael was saying, the industries that are going forward and that are going to drive our economy are not the industries that drove our economy for the last 30 years, and certainly not the ones that drove it in the 20th century. So you need to get out ahead, think about that sort of thing, what's going to matter, and all this chaos, to wrap it up and bring it back to what I said at the beginning of the show, is creating opportunity. But it's not in the companies that you all thought about, we all thought about 30 and 40 years ago. It's new companies. And 30 or 40 years ago, the same thing was happening when those songs were being written.
Yep, exactly right. All right. I want to thank all of you for joining us once again for Around the Table with Stacy Smith, two of my panelists here, to Kim and Frank and Kerry and Michael. And I hope that you join us again for the next edition of Around the Table with Stacy Smith. Thanks for joining us.